This episode is brought to you by Experian Automotive. Experian helps the auto industry turn powerful vehicle, consumer, and credit data into action. From smarter marketing and better credit decisions to fraud protection, vehicle history, and market insights, they can help you move faster and stay ahead of the competition. Learn more at Experian Automotive.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Tuesday, July 28th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, a powerful earthquake in Japan is affecting auto production in a key manufacturing hub. Federal safety regulators take aim at Tesla's door design, and President Trump takes his tariff pitch to GM's backyard. Plus, this year's automotive news top suppliers list is out, and the companies rising fastest aren't the ones you might expect.
Companies last year weren't really sure exactly how much to invest, where to invest. And I think that sort of just reflects the industry just sort of in 2025 kind of buckling down and, just trying to get through.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. A 7.1 magnitude earthquake rattled southwestern Japan today, disrupting auto production in a key manufacturing hub. Toyota suspended second shift operations at its Lexus assembly plant and two other Kyushu facilities, including an engine plant and hybrid powertrain plant. The automaker aims to resume first shift work Wednesday, pending supply chain and damage evaluation. Nissan said it continued production as planned, but is monitoring the situation. Both automakers report no injuries or major damage, but supplier disruptions in the region could emerge in the days ahead. We'll have more on this story in a minute with Automotive News Asia editor Hans Greimel, who joins us from Tokyo. Federal safety regulators are moving to set new car door rules after a string of deadly incidents tied to Tesla's electric door handles. NHTSA has granted a petition to begin a rulemaking process that would require a robust and obvious door egress system in all new vehicles. Bloomberg News uncovered at least 15 deaths in crashes where occupants couldn't escape Teslas that caught fire. But don't expect a quick fix. Michael Brooks of the Center for Auto Safety says a final compliance date before 2030 is unlikely. And President Trump made his first ever visit to General Motors' Milford Proving Ground in Michigan on Monday. Trump touted tariffs and attacked Biden-era EV policies before a crowd of supporters in a speech that resembled a campaign rally ahead of Michigan's August 4th primary. GM CEO Mary Barra introduced the president on stage. Trump used the moment to lay out his trade pitch in plain terms.
My policy is simple. If you make your truck or your car in a foreign country, you have to pay for the privilege of sending it into our market and making a lot of money. But if you build in a factory in Michigan or someplace in our country and make your automobiles or trucks right here in America, you pay zero taxes, zero tariff. You pay zero.
Trump also took a swipe at UAW President Shawn Fain, calling him bad news for auto workers. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Automotive News Asia editor Hans Greimel is based in Tokyo, and he was there when the quake hit last night. Our own Jake Neer reached him late in the evening Tokyo time to get the latest.
Hans Greimel, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thank you, Jake. Good to be here.
Yeah, sorry to hear about the circumstances that we're talking about in Japan right now, but what do we know so far about what the devastation means for auto companies specifically?
Well, the Kyushu is the very far southwestern main island of Japan. It's the one that's closest to China and to Korea, and it's a major actual automaking hub for Toyota and for Nissan. So Nissan has two plants there. Toyota has a big Lexus plant there that are really geared towards export because they're on the water and they're near the rest of Asia. And those plants are not in the exact quake zone, but they were feeling the quake. And Toyota canceled the second shift of their operations after the quake hit. Nissan kept working through the shift, and at this point, both plants expect to be up and running in the morning the following day, but they're still watching the situation carefully. There's a couple wild cards at play here because it was a huge quake, 7.1 magnitude, and the biggest in terms of shaking of the ground by Japan's own internal domestic scale. So there was a lot of damage in the region. And even though these plants themselves didn't suffer direct damage, there's always the possibility that one of their suppliers could have been damaged, and it might take days for that damage to kind of work its way through the supply chain and maybe disrupt operations even a couple days from now. So these are the kind of things that may come to light later, and maybe we don't know them all immediately after the quake. But anyhow, they plan to be up and running tomorrow. These, like I say, further other disruptions may come to light in the supply chain further down at other levels, or there could be another aftershock of the same size or possibly even bigger that could cause more destruction.
So, what are the companies saying at this point about their own timelines and what people should expect from them in the following days and weeks?
Well, right now they're just looking at the situation and trying to assess the continuity of their supply chains. They expect to be up and running the next day from the first shift, and we'll see how that goes. They'll probably be taking one step at a time and assessing the wider supply chain, going down as deep as many tiers as they can to make sure that all their suppliers are intact. And that they can look for alternative routes if they find some kinks in the supply chain.
Well, 2026 has been an eventful year, Hans, and this was one that we couldn't have predicted. Appreciate you staying up late for us to do this. It being about 11 o'clock at night your time as we're speaking recording time. So thanks again for doing that, and best of luck to everybody over there across the Pacific.
Okay, thank you.
Automotive News Asia editor Hans Greimel spoke with our own Jake Neer. Coming up, Chinese suppliers are climbing our list of top suppliers fast. North American ones are barely moving. And the whole ranking tells a story about an automotive supply chain that spent 2025 just trying to get through. That's next on Daily Drive.
This episode is brought to you by Experian Automotive. In today's auto market, every decision matters, and the businesses winning are the ones powered by better data. That's where Experian Automotive comes in. Experian combines industry-leading vehicle, consumer, and credit data with deep automotive expertise to help dealers, lenders, manufacturers, and industry partners make smarter decisions and move faster. Want to connect with the right shoppers at the right time? Looking to sharpen your marketing, make more confident credit decisions, better understand vehicle history, spot market trends, or strengthen your defenses against fraud? Experian helps make it happen. But it's not just about having a lot of data. It's about knowing what to do with it. Experian's automotive experts understand the challenges facing the industry today and help turn complex information into clear, actionable insights that drive results. Whether you're focused on growing your business, improving efficiency, managing risk, or staying ahead of market shifts, Experian Automotive gives you the intelligence and tools to compete with confidence. Learn more at experianautomotive.com. Experian Automotive, powering smarter decisions across the automotive ecosystem.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. This year's Automotive News Top Suppliers list is out. Each year, we rank the world's largest suppliers by sales to automakers. The biggest story from 2025 might be what it reveals about where the industry's momentum is shifting. Bosch holds the top spot for another year, but further down the list, Chinese suppliers are among the biggest gainers, while most North American suppliers were roughly flat. Automotive News reporter John Irwin covers the supply chain for us, and he dug into the data and the trends behind it. Our own Jake Neer spoke with John about what the numbers say about where the supply chain stands right now.
John Irwin, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, so this year's list, it comes at a very interesting time for suppliers here in the U.S. and across the globe. What were some of the biggest trends that stuck out to you, John?
Yeah, it's always interesting looking at this list year after year. A lot of things stay the same, but there are always, interesting trends. I think one of them kind of stands out is, and I know we're going to dig into this later, but talking about just the rise of Chinese suppliers. You look at most of the big gainers this year. A lot of them are Chinese suppliers, and I think that it reflects a lot of different trends in the industry that we'll get to in a little bit. In addition, though, I think one thing that kind of stands out every year to me, and this isn't necessarily new to this year, but is more or less at the very, very top of the list when we're talking about the giant suppliers. There's always a little bit of movement in terms of who's ranked second, third, fourth in any given year, but it is always kind of the same types of names up at the top. Speaks a little bit, I guess, to this a little bit of sense of stability that I think a lot of people in the supply chain in the auto industry have been looking for over the past couple of years as they've adapted to tariffs and changes in EV plans and that sort of thing. We'll get into some of those are manifesting themselves in certain ways on this list, but at the end of the day, with the exception of Continental no longer being on the list because of the spin-off of its automotive business into Almovio, it's a lot of similar names toward the top of the list, and that just always kind of stands out to me year after year, no matter what's going on in the industry in any given year. And then, I think there's just, the supply chain is in, like I said, it's been in kind of this, a phase where, companies last year weren't really sure, exactly how much to invest, where to invest. Maybe some programs were pushed back. I think generally you saw a lot of companies, especially in North America and Europe, revenue sort of flat year over year. I think that sort of just reflects the industry just sort of in 2025 kind of buckling down and just trying to get through as they try to get some sort of long-term clarity. Yeah, there's always this list is always really fascinating every year, and there's all sorts of things we can dig into.
Before we get into the Chinese suppliers, which I agree, we definitely should talk about that. There were some differences in how we put this list together this year. Is that right?
Yeah. I think every year it's the same basic idea. We're looking to find the largest suppliers in the world by sales to automakers. Sometimes we survey hundreds of companies. A lot of times those companies don't especially if they're not publicly traded, they might not get back to us, or they don't necessarily share that information. So at that point, we end up going back and digging through as much as we can in terms of publicly available data to try to discern, okay, this company sold X number of billions of dollars in goods to automakers. There's some differences this year. I know, for instance, Bosch at the very top of the list, which is topped the list for years now as the world's largest supplier. No difference there in that case, but that's an example where there are some sales in there. It's for their entire mobility business, which is mostly comprised of sales to automakers, but there might be some tweaks there that maybe or might include some sales that aren't. It's all about trying to find the best publicly available information. Obviously, if a supplier is publicly traded, they have to report a lot of this information, so we're able to do that. But yeah, it's kind of an evolving process, and our data center team does a great job, putting this together every year, and they're constantly evaluating how to get the best possible information, the most accurate information, as we put together this list every year.
So as we mentioned earlier, when you look at the top gainers this year, it's almost entirely Chinese and tech-focused companies. You have Qualcomm up 36%, CATL up 25%. Meanwhile, there are, suppliers from other parts of the world that are, seeing declines. So what's going on in China? What does this tell us, the split about where the industry is heading right now?
Yeah, China, it's really interesting, kind of looking at, the rise of China on this list. On a very basic level, I guess it sort of mirrors just the rise of, the Chinese auto industry over the past several years, and just the size of that market. Obviously, if you're a large supplier there, and even if you're just supplying the Chinese auto industry, or just supplying in Asia, those are huge markets, and if you're likely to end up on the list because of that. But there are some underlying trends that I think are really contributing to this trend. Our colleague Mark Recton did a great story that you can check out on autonews.com, basically digging into some of this. And, what he found said, this is in part being driven by consolidation in the Chinese supply base. As some of these companies, continue to consolidate or acquire new business. These companies end up becoming much larger, and that can account for them rising significantly on the list. We're seeing every year on the list. If you see a company rising significantly or falling, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times it just oftentimes has to do with a company acquiring a business or selling off or spinning off a business of it that it had the previous year. That's the case for a lot of these Chinese companies. But then at the same time, there are others, like CATL has, continued to, rise up the list over the past several years. That it's obviously a gigantic EV battery maker, and I'd imagine, just given the Chinese auto market, it'll continue to see battery makers and other tech suppliers in China continue to rise up these lists in the coming years, especially if this consolidation trend continues. There are a lot of really small suppliers and smaller companies in China, and but as this consolidation trend happens, I think we're going to see more and more of these companies continuing to rise up the lists in coming years.
Do tariffs show up in this list in your mind? I mean, it's such a huge force for suppliers this past, several months. So I assume that that's had an impact. Where does that show up?
Yeah, I think you can really see it in North America. With some exceptions, obviously, but for the most part, a lot of North American suppliers were more or less flat year over year. Some fell a little bit, some rose slightly. There wasn't a ton of movement among North American suppliers, generally speaking. And there are a bunch of factors that go into that. It's not just tariffs, but I think that, maybe tariffs played a role in that. As I mentioned earlier, there's suppliers last year in 2025, as tariff changes were, being rolled out, quickly, often with little notice, and these huge costs are coming in out of pretty quickly. These huge costs coming in, suppliers just sort of, in a lot of ways, we're just trying to get through, buckling down and looking at their supply chains. They're always trying to win new business. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of times it was difficult to know, okay, where is this new business? And all this going on at the same time as automakers continuing to pull back on a lot of their EV plans. Suppliers in a lot of cases got made huge investments to support these EV programs that aren't going to manifest as large as they were anticipating maybe a few years ago. All of that just sort of meant I think suppliers were just sort of trying to get through the year, and I think that the numbers, even though there are multiple factors that go into why things are kind of flat, I mean, that kind of reflects at the end of the day, it always just reflects how the auto market as a whole is doing. I do think that's sort of it feels like to a degree that tariffs played a role in that, at least in terms of not being able to make necessarily win a ton of new business because automakers maybe were re-examining what their plans were in the long run, either because of tariffs or EVs or any other factor at play. So it's kind of an unavoidable thing for suppliers last year. I know we've talked in the past about the relationships between suppliers and automakers and how those have changed, as they've tried to get through and manage these supply chain costs that are rising because of, trade issues and everything else. I think that sort of was reflected, at least to a degree, in those numbers.
So, John, where can people find this, and what should they keep in mind as they are going through the list?
Yeah, you can go on autonews.com. We have a landing page with our top suppliers list. You can see all our the articles that go with it that kind of go into some of these trends that we're talking about, and all the data that you want to see, the biggest gainers, biggest losers, and just the entire list. If you can go there, autonews.com, you'll be able to find it on our homepage. And yeah, as you're going through it, I think in addition to kind of some of the things that we've mentioned, I think it's as you're looking at these lists, it's when you look at it, why a company maybe jumped significantly, why it didn't. A lot of times, like I said, it's because of an acquisition or because of maybe lost a business. It's always interesting to kind of go through, you look at a company, why did it rise so much? And a lot of times you'll be able to go back and look and say, oh, they won this huge contract from a big automaker, or they made this important acquisition that boosted their revenue, or they spun this business off because they wanted to consolidate and really focus in on their profitable businesses at a time where margins are being squeezed. So these numbers on themselves, by themselves, are pretty interesting, but the stories behind them are always, I think, really interesting to me. And we've covered a lot of that over the past year. It's a good way to sort of get a refresher on kind of where the supply chain is at. So that's something I'd keep in mind, just as you're looking through, asking why did a company rise? Why did it fall? And there's usually an interesting story behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. Rich data, and I really appreciate you talking about it here today on Daily Drive, John. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
Automotive news reporter John Irwin spoke with our own Jake Neer. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to our own Hans Greimel for his reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on the Japan earthquake, the global auto supply chain, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.